Welcome to the Talk Like a Leader podcast, where we explore the mindset, skill set, and habit set of leadership communication. Using these tips, techniques, and tactics, you'll be able to talk like a leader to build better relationships and get more done. Your host is Guy Harris, who has more than 20 years of combined professional and military experience in consulting, coaching, and training in areas like team and interaction dynamics, communication strategies and tactics, as well as emotional intelligence. Take it away, Guy.
Hi, this is Guy Harris. Welcome to the Talk Like a Leader podcast. Once again this week, I have my friend and colleague, Carl Smith. And we had such a good time last week with our conversation about trust and some additional thoughts we had after recording that episode. We thought we'd revisit it this week with a little different spin on it, a little different direction. And this week, we're going to talk about the impact of building trust, what it can do in terms of improving your communication, improving the results and effectiveness you get from your leadership perspective. And Carl was sharing with me before we got into this episode an experience he had in a coaching relationship. Now, this is from a professional coach. It's not a person on a team. So the dynamics are a little bit different than if you're leading a team. And the dynamics are similar enough that I think there's a lesson to be learned here in terms of how the conversation goes. So first of all, welcome once again, Carl.
It's good seeing you again, Guy.
And now we're going to pick up that conversation you were sharing with me about some of the things we talked about last week. And if we miss something this week, please refer back to last week's episode. Basically, we talked about the idea of transactional trust and relational or people trust or emotional trust. So transactional task trust and emotional relational trust, how both of them have to be satisfied in order to have effective communication, and how different people approach them in different priority in terms of people putting different significance on the two pieces of trust that need to be present really in any highly trusting relationship. And Carl had a great example of how understanding the dynamics and the order you need to approach helped him in at least one specific coaching situation. So Carl, please tell us about the situation and what you observed in it.
Sure. And what's interesting is this scenario is fairly common in folks that I coach. We talked about this.
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
So there's a person that I have coached, and we were having a conversation. We had an agenda, but this person was so rattled by their leader that there was this disconnect that was taking place. And so this person shared with me, this is what I do. I make these connections. I get amazing feedback from people, and what that person was sharing with me was, other people like me. Do you like me? Mm-hmm. Do I get a pat on the back? Do I get that a boy, that a girl? Do I get a?
So is this right? That basically they related their accomplishment in terms of the relationships they had built, not in terms of the results they had achieved.
Yes.
And they were actually looking for a relational feedback on their efforts.
Yes. Saying that I've done a good job, right?
Yeah.
And
here's the other side.
And the leader is a very task-oriented person. And so I was sharing with the person I was coaching, don't expect all these accolades. It's about performance and productivity. It's about what task have you done. It's about communicating in a way that is factual. It's bottom line. It's to the point. It's and so this other person that works for this leader was saying, I've done all these things and I'm just not getting the feedback that I need. Kind of what Guy was sharing in a previous episode last week.
Yeah.
How important it is to be able to communicate. Yes, these are the things we've done, and also communicate in a way that there is a connection. And this poor person now is just deflated, unmotivated, just struggling with how to be productive in the state stage.
And not being in the situation, but kind of reflecting on similar conversations I've had with people, I'm going to guess that from an objective viewpoint, because this person created these relationships and made these connections, it's probably true that some things got done and some results were achieved. It's just that in communicating the accomplishment, the person who's frustrated didn't convey the results, they conveyed the relationships. And they assumed that their leader would infer that results happened because relationships were built. Is that kind of the dynamic that happened here?
Very similar, yes.
And so they're kind of talking past each other.
Yes.
And honestly, if we were coaching the leader in this case, which we're not having that relationship, if we were coaching the leader, we would probably encourage them, if you want to get more out of this person and get more results, you might want to acknowledge what they've done in a relational way. So we would have a different conversation with them because they're missing something too. So both sides of the relationship are missing something.
Yes.
So it's, like two ships who pass in the night kind of thing. I'm talking about relationship and you want me to deliver task, and you're talking about task, but I want you to deliver relationship. And we got to do both.
You got to do both to be effective.
Yeah. Kind of reminds me of a similar thing. We were talking about a coaching client I had. This one particular client had her as a client for about a year. We worked together for a while on some specific work issues, business issues she was going through. And we would talk on average about twice a month, and each conversation would go about an hour. That was our schedule for that particular relationship. And most of those coaching calls consisted of her sharing the story of her experiences for the last 2 weeks in about 45 or 50 minutes. And then about 5 to 7 minutes of me saying, well, here's what I heard you say. Here's what I think you ought to do next. So from my viewpoint, the value of the conversation was those 5 or 7 minutes. I told you what to do. From her perspective, the value of the conversation was getting to tell her story. And she wasn't ready to hear what to do until she had told her story. So it's that back to the idea, both sides have to be accomplished if we're going to get results, because she was very happy with her business results because I was helping her with her task list. She just didn't care about her task list until she knew that I liked her. And likewise, I've had other coaching clients where we don't schedule an hour. We schedule 30 minutes. And it's pretty much a bullet point. Here's what needs to be done. Here's what needs to be done. Here's what needs to be done. Bye. See you. Talk to you next week or in 3 weeks or a month, whatever it is. But the history of most of those relationships goes back to there were 1 or 2 very long conversations about getting to know each other before we got the transactional piece. Since both pieces were comfortably in place, I didn't have to reinforce the relationship each time. It was just get to the task. Whereas with the relational client, I had to reinforce the relationship every time before we could get to the task.
Right.
And
that's good.
So what other observations do you have or thoughts do you have about the impact of building trust, and why does it matter so much?
Well, funny you mentioned that. I remember us in the office drawing this diagram, drawing this flow chart of trust. And how and the ability to communicate something important or significant.
Yeah.
The higher level of trust, the easier it is to be able to communicate fast, effective, efficient, even when there's a very critical issue that's on the table. And I just remember that so vividly, and I'm like, that's so true. So the impact of what we're talking about is when you have that high level of trust, knowing a person's, whether they're transactional, relational, really both, but knowing what tends to have a greater weight.
So where do we need to start the conversation?
Yes. And how do you navigate that in order to have that high level of trust, in order to have a positive impact?
Yeah, you triggered a thought for me going back to a book that I read a number of years ago called The Speed of Trust by Stephen M. R. Covey. And in that book, he has a phrase called a trust tax, meaning in the absence of trust, it's a drag on the relationship or a drag on the organization, that if you don't have a high level of trust, you just can't move quickly.
Yep.
And he explores this idea of transactional and relational trust and both sides of it and how it matters. Not exactly in the same way we've just talked about it. So I'd recommend, if you want to know more about trust, go read that book, The Speed of Trust by Stephen M. R. Covey. I hope what comes across in our conversation today is why it matters so much, at least on a personal communication level, that if you get the order of communication out of order, you create trouble for yourself. I'm guessing with this one coaching client, ultimately, you gave them specific things they could do to improve the situation. And based on the way you framed it, I'm guessing that probably because of your coaching experience, you kind of knew where this was going to wind up. You just knew you had to give them time to vent the frustration before you could share the solution. And that awareness to this person is very relational, and I need to give them a chance to vent this relational frustration, or they're not going to be prepared to hear the to-do list. And so if you get it out of order, you can know the right answer. And if you don't satisfy the relationship, the right answer doesn't land right.
Right.
And likewise, you can be very friendly and kind and cordial. And if you don't have some good advice to give or good next steps, then you didn't do your job as a coach or as a leader.
Right.
And the order matters. For some people, you just got to get to the point and then worry about being nice. And other people, you got to be nice and then get to the point. I guess that's the science part, knowing that it's true. And the art part is knowing how to do it.
Yes. Good. Well said.
And so any closing thought or broad perspective you want to offer before we start wrapping things up, Carl?
Yes. And I just want to let everyone know what we're talking about is not unique to 1 or 2 or 5 or 10 people.
Right.
These are issues that are very common.
Common everywhere. Yeah.
Oh, everywhere. And how critical it is I believe that if you don't have trust, you're not going to be effective. You're not going to get things done. You're not going to be able to communicate in a way effectively to do things and get things done. So it's paramount that you work at this.
That's well said, Carl. It's paramount. You will not be able to move forward if you don't know how to build trust. And whatever your natural perspective is, whether you're more transactional in your first priority or more relational in your first priority, as a leader, it's important to start to develop the ability to be able to do both and to deliver both in your communications. And we're reiterating what we said last week and kind of highlighting it this week, why it matters so much. It's such a big deal. We felt like we had to spend some more time on it. And I want to thank you for being with me again today, Carl. Hopefully
that's awesome, man.
Covered some things. I appreciate you sharing your example, because I think it contributes to the conversation and helps round things out for people. And in closing, I just want to say, trust is a big deal. As a leader, you want to learn how to demonstrate trust, build trust, engender trust, not just on a one-to-one basis, but throughout your organization, so that your team can go forward and you can remove what Stephen M. R. Covey calls the trust tax that slows down results and slows down effectiveness and slows down communication. It just drags you back. If you'll learn how to do that and learn how to apply some intentionality with the people in your life, that if you'll learn how to know what order you need to approach the person, is it task first and then relationship, or relationship first and then task? If you'll develop the art of that skill, that tactical skill, you can talk like a leader. This has been the Talk Like a Leader podcast. You can listen to this show every week wherever you get your podcast. If you haven't, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. I'm Guy Harris, and thanks for listening.